Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Media Buffet. Before we get started, let me just say that this might be one of the best discussions you might ever hear of any content in the history. Because simply put, I have so much to say about this series, this topic in particular, in both sides of the coin. And all of that is going to amount to a great episode. Long ago, the four nations lived in harmony. That is, until the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar could size up to the occasion and put a stop to the conquest of Fire Lord Ozai. Today we will be discussing Season 1 of the live action adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender. Let me just say this as a quick disclaimer. Also, if I didn't introduce myself, my name is Pancakes. I think I did that in the beginning, I'm not sure. But I'm just so laser focused in what I'm about to say throughout the entire discussion that there's no need for an introduction. So, here goes. Today we're going to be discussing season 1 of the live action adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender, which is arguably the greatest series Nickelodeon has ever created. A lot of people categorize great as most popular or most impactful or generally the most recognized. And I think if you amount to all of the categories, SpongeBob would take the throne. But in terms of general quality and general storytelling, the animated version of The Last Airbender is arguably the greatest series Nickelodeon has ever created. So, when Netflix decided to make a live action adaptation series, they had some pretty big shoes to fill. Safe to say, in my opinion, they did not fill them up at all. They did not meet the expectations that fans were expecting, more the less critic. And yeah, this is the first time. To give you an idea of how passionate I am about this episode, this is the first time in any episode of Media Buffet history that I'm actually taking notes about a topic so that I can discuss it because I have so many things to say in both the good and bad. Because this series is the definition of mixed signals. Now I'm talking about the live action version. So, unlike the other topics, I'm not going to go on a episode by episode basis because I am more or less going to integrate that into my entire discussion. So I'm not going to grade each episode and say which one I like the best, as if with other series, because again, that will be integrated in my complete discussion. What I'm going to do instead, also if you hear sounds, sorry, that is my window. I'm going to be discussing the pros and cons of the series and what I consider the best and worst characters. And finally, we will we will close with what's to come, the expectations I have for this series in the future, and by extension, probably most fans, because it's already been confirmed that there's going to be a second and third season to parallel the three seasons that Nickelodeon originally created. And yeah, let's get started. So, obviously, episode 1 is titled Aang, and it covers Aang's complete origin story. And it basically concludes, basically bridges between Aang's arrival to the world after 100 years frozen in a giant ice ball, colliding with Katara and Sokka's encounter while hunting. And of course, we all know that this is the drawing point, the opening sequence of the Avatar series. And yeah, also, I want to clarify I'm going to be comparing the live action series to the animated series. I'm not going to be mentioning the books from which this series originally was made from, because we're covering the adaptation from animated to live action, not from book to live action, because that's just a whole new gap to cover. That's like saying that I should compare the Lego adaptations of Lord of the Rings to the original books, because it was first the movies, then the games, in the same way that this was first the animated series, then the live action series. So, as I was saying, the first episode is pretty good. It does a fair job of covering the basis of what made each character great and what the story is going to go from there, how the story is going to go from there. But it gave me a lot of hope that I can now say is false. Also, if again, fair disclaimer, if you haven't watched the live action or animated series, please don't listen to this episode because I'm going to spoil the entire thing. I have watched the live action series, so far season 1, the complete animated series, all 3 seasons, and have watched all 4 seasons of Legend of Korra. So I know what I'm talking about. Now, let's get started. I mean, rejuvenate, not started, because we already did it. So, after the drawing point of the series, it gave me a lot of hope. Hope that this series was going to be completely faithful to the animated series and that it was going to have a great overall storytelling. I was concerned about a couple of things going into the series, specifically the bending, because of the monstrosity and traumatizing experience that was the 2010 movie, The Last Airbender. I was concerned about the dialogue, that it was all just going to be completely stupid, again, like the 2010 movie. A lot of people had trauma going into the series because, how do I put this? The original animated series just had a type of charm accompanying the great storytelling. And that charm made it what it is to this day. Like it is a kid show. It has its silliness and filler moments, but at the same time, it had this storytelling ability that is completely unmatched to any other animated series to this day. And that includes Bluey, and that includes any other animated series you can mention. So, yeah, as I was saying, the opening gave me hope. Safe to say, those hopes were completely thwarted by the second episode. Already by the second episode, I could tell that this series had a huge problem. One of its several huge problems, but one of its biggest is that the story in itself is just too rushed. I know that they had to cover like a multifaceted episode series on a live action budget, which I understand is more restricted given that you're dealing with real people here and you can't just animate your fantasy in it. But I felt like they could have done better. From the get go, I saw that Aang, yes, Aang, the main central and focal point of the entire story, Aang's development in dialogue to me throughout the entire series felt a bit too rushed and too direct. Like, there were moments within the animated series where Aang suffers a certain amount of special loss. And those moments were recreated here. We see the moment when the Fire Nation takes over the Sovereign Air Temple. We see the moments where Aang encounters loss and he fueled by grievance, goes out into the ocean with Appa and freezes himself in a ball, unconsciously, of course. But yeah, we see those moments. But that charm that basically led to us being captivated by the Avatar's moments, that charm just isn't present. I don't know if it's something from the actor in question. I don't know if it's something from how they wanted to present it in the live action series, but it just isn't there. It feels empty. Like half the time, Aang was just walking around and spreading out motivational quotes like, I have to save the world. I have to be great. And I think it was specifically that, the charm. Voice acting versus regular acting. I would say that voice acting is harder because you're not there. You can't present your body cues to the audience because the character is animated. And that's why I think Aang's original voice actor in the series captivated his character better than the live action version because him via his spectacular voice act via his spectacular voice acting led to him captivating the emotions of Aang as a character. You hear Aang in the animated series and you can feel what he's going through, and that's a sign of great development. You can feel he's a young boy with great duties. You can feel that he's lost in a world that he doesn't know what to do with himself, and he has such big shoes to fill, just like Netflix had such big shoes to fill. And I think that in the live action, Netflix wanted to reflect what Aang did in the live action, completely failing as a character. And don't get me wrong, they recreated some of the moments, and that's good because you're staying faithful to the series. But at the same time, they fumbled Aang so hard. I'm not going to go into this personal rant of mine throughout the entire first sequence of the episode, but I'm going to move on to the other characters because I think that's what's best for this episode. I'll cover Aang more progressively later on. So, as I talked previously, yes, the series is fairly faithful to the original animated three-season run. It covers most of the bases that the original covered. It gave a bunch of development to a bunch of the crucial characters, like Katara, like Iroh, like Zuko, and yeah, overall, it's a great series in terms of character faithfulness. And now that we got that covered, I want to cover those bases that they didn't. Those bits and pieces of the story that were so crucial for season one, but yet they completely missed the mark. And as I mentioned before, some of the characters are just way too direct. A great story is a story that gives us the performance, not just from the word of mouth, but also from the body cues. I don't know if I'm being too meticulous, but there are certain movies where you just see what the characters are going through only from their expressions. It's just the little things. It's not that I wanted this series to be perfect, but at least I wanted it to capture each character accurately, as any series that adapts from another should. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this series held up that reputation that Avatar had because they just missed a questionable number of marks. Now, what am I going to talk about here? I'm going to talk about the good and the bad characters. Thankfully, most of the characters are relatively well written and well presented, but there are just some characters, there are a few that are just too crucial for the story and they completely miss the mark. Well, not on all of them, but I think you know where I'm going to with this. The first character that I think was really good was Katara. And why do I think Katara? is a good character? Well, in the original, the arc of Katara is basically her as a humble, innocent Sovereign Water Tribe member, aspiring to become a warrior, something that her brother Sokka already is, but is struggling to cope with the inner parts of being a warrior. Meanwhile, Katara just wants to get there. She feels like she could be something more, especially fueled by the loss of Gran Gran, who, from what we understand, was her role model throughout her infancy. And yeah, overall, throughout the series, the live action, from the start of them fleeing from the Sovereign Water Tribe, to them completing their main season one arc by defeating the Fire Nation at the Northern Water Tribe, she was a very well rounded character. She went from almost not knowing any waterbending to being a pretty respectable master to the level of some mid-level waterbending experts at both tribes. I mean, Northern Water Tribe, because she was one of the only ones in the Sovereign Tribe. And yeah, overall, her character was very well rounded, and I liked that very much. We saw her character be driven into life in the first episode, Aang, and then throughout the other episodes as they traveled through the Earth Kingdom and to the Northern Water Tribe and all that. She was really well written and really well covered. And one of the characters that I don't feel is either good or bad, that they were cooking with the character, but just dropped the ball a couple of times here and there, was Sokka, Tara's brother. And let me tell you why. I don't know if it's the fact that I'm biased, because I saw an article from the get go that Netflix intentionally altered Sokka's character because they felt that he was too sexist in the original, in that they reduced the scenes and dialogue in which he was outright sexist. And I get what they were trying to do, because sexism in its apophagy, so sexism in itself is wrong. But at the same time, Sokka being sexist was such a crucial part to the original story. If Sokka wasn't sexist towards Katara, her not being able to fight, and Sokka not motivating her unconsciously from his sexism, Katara in the original would have never gone to where she went. She would have never become such a great waterbender, because Sokka provided the building blocks to her motivation to flee her way of life after her massive loss. And they just fumbled the ball completely with that one. That was one of the moments that, for me, in the live action series, just no, just no. And I'm afraid that that was echoed throughout the rest of the series. It set a precedent, a bad precedent. It set a sour taste in a bunch of our mouths. Sokka in the original went from this goofy, strong character that more and more throughout the season turned into this serious person, this formed man, to this cowardly dude who solidifies himself from sheer loss instead of having those formative moments thanks to his sexism. What I'm trying to say is that Sokka's flawed mindset was corrected progressively throughout the story in the original. People like Yue, Suki, no, it's not. I'm confusing people. Sorry. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Suki's a Kyoshi Warriors member, right? I think. Yeah. People like Yue, people like Suki, people like Katara drove him to change his mindset because he had firsthand experience because he triggered those moments for all of them. And yeah, I think they just shallowed out Sokka's character in the story. But why is he in the category instead of bad? Because he redeemed himself from sheer development. At least he wasn't a completely anti character like Aang. Sokka was at least fairly fleshed out, and that's why he's in the category. Now, unlike Sokka, this character, I believe, is one of the best written characters in the entire series. Not just in the animated version, but if they keep space going in the live action version as well. And this character is Zuko. Why do I say this? I'm going to read to you Zuko's story, and you tell me whether it's a story you can resonate with or not. Zuko, an outlawed, a banished prince from the winning kingdom, the Fire Nation, the dominant force in the world at the moment. Zuko is exiled from his own kingdom because his Fire Lord, his father, mind you, is obsessed with world domination, with global conquest, and he will stop at nothing. The Fire Lord in itself is another great character. Cold Cunning did a great job with that one. But Zuko was exiled until he can prove to his father that he is strong enough to capture the one thing that is keeping them from world domination, the Avatar, who most recently appeared in the world, and that set off Zuko's quest to go out there and capture Aang. And throughout the series, in several instances, as Aang and the gang travel through the different kingdoms, feel Zuko's grief, and you can feel Zuko's frustration. We get introduced to Zuko as a rage monster, and progressively throughout the rest of the season, we see Zuko progressively get more broken and broken up by different people from his own kingdom, whether it is Admiral Zhao or Fire Lord Ozai or Iroh leading him to take the charge. Zuko in himself is just wow. Chef's Kiss, the greatest written character so far in this series, and I hope they keep it up because sets a prime example of what the other characters should be. Great writing, but I, I don't know. That dynamic duo of Zuko and Iroh is one that few other characters can adapt, can match up to. And this is not as big of a disappointment as Aang, but I feel like they should have done better with Azula, Zuko's sister. Because unlike Zuko, Azula is still the Fire Nation and is by her father's side. She's in training, and if not for Zuko, she would be the heir to the Fire Nation throne. She would be the Fire Lord, and we get we got expressed throughout the series that that is what she wants. That is who she wants to be. But I don't know if it's that I'm remembering the original series wrong, or they slightly missed the mark because from start to finish, for me, Azula was a cold and cunning character, completely merciless, reminiscent of Kuvira in The Legend of Korra. And yeah, to me, she was just this cunning and cold character from the get go, and sometimes sassy in the crucial moments. And again, that could be something that was originally captivated by the voice actress, but if they truly wanted to be faithful to the series, I feel like they would have handled Azula's character better. Azula's character in the live action is cowardly and, like the Fire Lord, obsessed with her goals. But at the same time, they did not do enough to capture that cunningness and ruthlessness the original Azula had. Her hatred fueled by her jealousy of her brother, who is failing in his task as they speak. And yeah, they slightly missed the mark because they failed to captivate what truly drove her and how she expressed herself in the original, her emotions. Just being this cowardly and desperate character, wanting to achieve her goals, but rushing to complete them in the second to last and last episodes, I, I don't know. It's not a good end for me in this season. So for me, Azula is one of the other bad characters alongside Aang because they did not do enough to deal her the justice she had in the original as a great character. Now, now we got most of the original characters out of the question. Now we're going into some other characters that were really great, were really amazing, and but I feel like I have to set them apart from the originals, from the others, because these characters are just, I don't know. I don't know what it is about them, but I can't pinpoint their greatness unlike the others. And these two characters, some of the characters have great writing, and some of the characters have great appearance. But to me, sorry, not Iroh and Ozai. Iroh, Ozai, and Katara, to me, are the only characters that have the complete package of best appearance, best writing, and best faithfulness to the original series. Fire Lord. And yeah, that's pretty much what I had to do with these characters. Iroh, to me, in the original, Iroh is my favorite character because in the good, the bad, and the ugly, Iroh continues to push forward to care for his nephew Zuko and to accompany him because he sees from the get go that the Fire Lord's mindset, the Fire Lord's plans for conquest are flawed. Something that Zhao doesn't realize until later on in the season when he goes to take over the Northern Water Tribe. And yeah, the plan overall is great set in motion, but Iroh sees that it has its flaws, and that's why he accompanies Zuko to go do what has to do, which to Zuko is capture the Avatar, but to Iroh is just make sure his nephew doesn't get killed. And more importantly, I feel like Iroh sees Zuko as his son, a son that he no longer has. We get revealed for how the original and the live action, which they did a great job in captivating, that Luten, Iroh's son, was killed in the siege of Ba Sing Se. For those of you who don't know, Ba Sing Se is arguably the most important city for the Earth Kingdom, which is also visited throughout the series, but they only go to Omashu and Kyoshi Island in this season. In season 2, they go more in depth into the Earth Kingdom as we get introduced to Toph, Ba Sing Se, and yeah, all those things. But generally speaking, Iroh in himself has the most key moments in season 2. But in season 1, that's where we really get him. Like, we really see that one spark that sets him apart from the others. His motivational quotes, his desire to accompany Zuko because he is still grieving from the loss of Luten when he was an active general for the Fire Nation and conquested Ba Sing Se. Of course, his operation failed and led to him withdrawing from being active, but yeah, These traits are what makes him a great character, and they did a great job in personifying him. They really nailed it. Along with Katara, they nailed it. But at the same time, Katara, being a more fleshed out character than Aang, same with Iroh, is a red flag and should have been a greater flag than expected. But yeah, we're not going to focus too much into these characters because we have more to cover. And as I said before, they gave Zhao the Ozai the complete package. Ozai literally looks like the Fire Lord in the animated series. They did a great job. Like, to me, the greatest casting was Fire Lord Ozai. He absolutely looks like him. And I'm not saying just physically. You hear him, and he is literally the Fire Lord. Same with Zuko. But yeah, that's all I have to say for now. They did a good job by covering all the bases with the character. He's villainous, he's cunning, he's cold, what Azula should have been. I feel like part of what drove the Fire Lord to favor Azula over Zuko in the first season was that he saw himself in Azula, his coldness, his cunningness, something that they failed to cover. And yeah, that's what makes him great. Some of the other characters that I have not much to say about are Yue, the spiritual leader at the Northern Water Tribe, who she was good. She was a good character. She didn't stand out from the others because she was a side character, but they did a good job in being faithful to her character in the as with the original. They made her all the sacrifices that they made her make the sacrifice that she had to do, which was becoming the moon. Imagine losing your potential love interest because she decided to become the moon. Sokka has a tough life. I'm sorry. He loses his parents. He travels across multiple kingdoms with a kid he met a couple of days ago, and then proceeds to lose several of his love interests because they have things to do. He doesn't meet with Suki again until later on in the animated series because she has duties as a Kyoshi warrior. She loses Yue because she has to become the moon to restore the balance that Zhao threw off by killing the moon spirit. And yeah, overall, good character, but she doesn't stand out alongside the rest. Like, I'm not saying the moon thing is bad, it's just somehow funny to me. Imagine losing your love interest because she had to become the moon. But yeah, another character that I feel was really great was Jet. In the short time that he was with Team Avatar, Team Aang, whatever the hell you want to call it, he single handedly fueled Katara's mission. And again with Katara, like it's a it's a big deal, humongous deal that Katara is more fleshed out than Aang. And I don't know if it's because this is the season where they have to focus on water bending, but I don't know. That is another thing I'm going to discuss later on. But Jet, moving back to Jet, Jet as a character is really good because they covered the main base that he has to do to the story. He is the person that motiva- mo- motivize, motivates Katara to keep going. And she learns things from Jet that drive her onward with the story. She learns about what she has to do. And overall, that is the one of the main driving points of the story. And that little rivalry between Jet and Katara and the whole dynamic with the family and Omashu, that's another thing. It's good. It's a good moment, but I feel like they could have circumcised less and focused more on certain elements of the story, like Aang actually waterbending. Now I'm getting back to Aang. Also, hold on. Before I get back to Aang, Zhao as a character was really good. Not just like Yue good, but really, really good. They did a great job in personifying Zhao as the small villain before moving on to the greater bad in Ozai later on in the story. They did a great job at personifying him as that. Because from the get go, we see that Zhao is this cowardly general who, like Ozai, no, like Iroh, sees that he's flawed, that Ozai is flawed, and he takes it upon himself to com- to complete this mission of taking over the Northern Water Tribe to serve as a distraction to capture Omashu. And he is basically the reason why we get that bittersweet ending where they successfully fend off the Fire Nation from the Northern Water Tribe, but at the same time, it serves as a distraction because they then capture Omashu, imprison King Bumi, and yeah, overall, it's a bittersweet ending, and they covered it pretty great. But aside from Shao, there's one thing, this one red flag that I feel it's the entire reason why this series is not considered great. Overall, the series was good. It was faithful to the original. It had its fair bit of storytelling, and the CGI was better, and basically everything else was better than the original 2010 movie. I feel like the pyramid currently is at the lower level of the 2010 movie because nothing can be worse than that. Then the series, the live action series, and then the original animated series, with Korra wedged somewhere in between the live action and the animated. Now, I'm going to get into why I think Ab- the Avatar, Aang, not learning bending at all in this season is the biggest red flag of this series. Also, before I get into that, Sai was a pretty character because his motivation was understandable, but I don't think they did a good job in covering it. They should have personified him a bit more. But it was decent. Now, back to Aang. The point of the Avatar is to learn all four elements. And the original focus of the series is Aang, as an airbender, having to learn the other three elements while simultaneously navigating the world with his friend group to eventually have all four elements mastered and be had full strength to face the Fire Nation and put the world back at peace, restore peace. And understandably, if you're going to accomplish that, you have to focus one element through each season. It's a trilogy. First water, and earth, then fire. And understandably, they started the series surrounding Aang with waterbenders. They go to the Northern Water Tribe, spend time with some of the best available water bending masters at the time. But no, I don't think I saw one scene at all in the live action where Aang actually waterbended. In the original animated series, what they do is, as Katara learns waterbending from the scroll that Gran Gran gave her, they venture out into the world, and on the side, while they encounter each of their problems, Katara progressively learns waterbending from the scroll. And Aang, being the Avatar, already possesses some premature skills as a waterbender. But aside from one or two scenes, I don't think they developed it at all in the live action. In the original, when they get to the Northern Water Tribe, aside from Katara trying to prove herself, Aang learns waterbending from Master Paku, the old guy. The same guy who prevented Katara from fighting, and then Katara did her whole thing and completed her season 1 arc, which was great. They just didn't include Aang waterbending. And, as a master of all four elements, I think Zhao put it best. Master of three elements doesn't have the same ring to it, you would think. But no, Netflix just didn't care. And I think I know why the original creators of the Last Airbender series withdrew from the project mid production because they just saw this vision that Netflix had as flawed, and rightfully so. How are you going to make a live action adaptation about the Avatar, the guy who has to master all the elements to face his greatest enemy and restore balance to the world? How are you going to just not include him mastering the elements? Like, we see Katara get better at it, we see all the other characters get developed, but how are you not going to to let us see Aang waterbend? I don't know if it was just a budgeting issue. I don't know if it was just a writing issue or that it just completely flew over the writers' heads. But the Avatar does not waterbend in this series at all. And it's not that they didn't have the budget or the resources to like visualize him waterbending, because there's plenty of waterbending. The entire finale sees Aang take over the form of the water spirits, the blackfish, to then go to the Fire Nation and single handedly destroy them. And I think that's another thing. Some people may get confused. If Aang didn't learn waterbending, how the fuck can he control the monster? Because that's not him. That's the spirit. He is driving the spirit as this personified giant form to deal with the Fire Nation. And that's an original part of the story. That's understandable. But how are you going to tell me that he can control the monster, a waterbending monster, if he does not know how to waterbend? Netflix just completely threw that shit out the window, it seems, because they just did not care. They did not care. They did not include Aang waterbending, the crucial part of the story, the one thing that is going to drive Aang to go to the other kingdoms and learn about the elements. But no, Aang did not waterbend in this season, and that is extremely disappointing. The one thing that he had to do through the season, and he didn't do it. Yeah, he fended off the Fire Nation from the Northern Water Tribe, and that personifies him as putting his friends above his duties. Something that all the other avatars that he encountered, Kyoshi, Roku, Kuruk, all of them told him to put his duties above his friends. And he consistently defied them and went ahead and wiped out the Fire Nation. But at least he did it with the help of Waterbender. Something that he just doesn't do in the live action adaptation, which is increasingly frustrating because how are you going to write a story without its focal point? How are you going to adapt a series from an already existing season without drawing from it? It's an adaptation, not a standalone series. This isn't a series that draws from another form of content to fuel its own story. This isn't the twisted version of Disney's animated movies to fit their more family friendly narrative. If you only knew what Peter Pan did in the original, I understand if it's like a series that draws from another, but no, this is an adaptation. As an adapted series, you have to be faithful to the original at least, at a bare minimum. And they did a good job in covering that throughout the other bases. But and not learning waterbending? What the fuck, Netflix? The only possible explanation for me to understand why Netflix just chose to not include waterbending for Aang is if, and only if, they decide to circumvent the entirety of season 2 and just try to make do Aang waterbending alongside him earthbending, which just throws the entire series off balance, ironically. The beauty of the original series was season one, Aang learns waterbending and the characters find themselves. Season two, Aang learns earthbending with the help of Toph, and they continue throughout the quest of the world to get stronger and build up courage. The third season, he learns fire, and they sneak from the Fire Nation to make the final preparations for Aang's battle with Fire Lord Ozai. And that's the balance and the beauty of the original. Something that Netflix, if they go through with this, are going to completely throw off course. Aang's going to have to learn waterbending and earthbending in the same season, something that they can only do if they circumcise the season to not include all of the filler that it has, because admittedly, it has a lot of filler. And then again, it's not even all filler. The episodes that feel like filler actually drive the characters forward. There were, sorry, there were some parts in this series that felt a bit empty, and that is why they cut the filler episodes completely and just tried to circumcise from there to like build up a story from what was left. And yeah, that's a problem because there are just certain cues and things that the original characters had that are just not going to be there and are not going to make sense in the long run. And controlling the giant water spirit monster to fend off the Fire Nation doesn't make sense if he doesn't know how to water bend. And it's not going to make sense for him to fight Toph in the season 2 fight that leads to her leaving with them if he doesn't know how to earthbend. And if it's, sorry, I got that last part wrong because I know he doesn't earthbend in the fight, but at least he has some prior knowledge, which seems to me like Netflix knows nothing the fuck about. As I was saying, the only way that it makes sense for me for Netflix to go ahead with this story and circumcise season 2 is if they cut the filler episodes, which is already going to be problematic. Because if they cut the filler episodes, the writing has to be perfect. They have to convey the characters better so as to properly show what they're going through. And not just that, demonstrate that they're growing. Not like Aang that seems to just not grow throughout the series at all. And not only do they have to circumcise the season, they also have to introduce Toph, who is Aang's earthbending teacher. And I feel like Toph's development is going to be 50-50 because, like Zuko, Toph is a member of a wealthy family, but unlike Zuko, she leaves voluntarily because she can't stand her family. She's the polar opposite of Zuko. And yeah, her character is either going to be make or break for this series because I don't know. I quite simply do not know. Overall, this series was a great improvement from the 2010 movie, that's for sure. The bending scenes were impressive. I actually was astonished to see the scenes. The final sequence, as unnecessarily long as it was great. The CGI was astounding. Like the bending scenes, the fire scenes, the earth scenes, the air scenes, all of them were great. But there's one exception. That being some of the scenes that had Appa in them. When they were flying through the air, when they arrived at Omashu, I don't know. Some of the scenes to me were reminiscent of Black Widow scenes, specifically that one where Yelena just like stabbed the fucking ship and then blew out of the air. Yeah, those scenes just weren't it. And you can tell that they definitely had to cut some corners in the series, specifically in that part. So, yeah, that was like that one part that just didn't like quite look right, but everything else was great. The bending was great. The elements were great. The the scenes were great. Like wow, great. Like amazing. Like that was one thing they definitely got better from the original like movie. Also the character designs, like they were also great. They didn't have some pointless brown clothing on or like just the characters that did not look like the original at all looking at you the 2010 movie. All those things are great improvements over the 2010 movie. But like I said, those questionable bits of CGI, the rushed or direct character development, and just the detrimental changes that they made to certain characters, like Sokka not being sexist, Azula not being cold and cunning, Aang being completely empty, those things were the downfall of this series. And if Netflix doesn't step up and take criticism from its fans and make the series actually well rounded, the characters be actually developed and actually learning the elements most of all, please Netflix, don't be an idiot. To me, it's either they're gonna go with what I said, which is Aang has to learn water bending, and they're gonna cut the filler to make room for earth bending, and then they have to have perfect writing and character. Fuck, they have to have perfect writing and development because if not, the series is gonna get thrown out the window, like they did with Aang in the first season. They either gonna do that, or they're gonna go with this alternate story that's just gonna change the way that that people are gonna see the series completely. They're gonna throw a little. They're gonna commit a Little Mermaid, and they're gonna ruin the story completely. Only that instead of putting woman above the story like they did with Little Mermaid, they're gonna put. I don't know what the fuck they're gonna put. I don't know what the fuck they were gonna smoke if they're gonna do that, but I'm gonna want some of that because that shit must be real good if their judgment is so clouded so as to circumvent the story to whatever the fuck they want to make it. Which is, if they don't make it like how I said they're going to do it, then they're just gonna have Aang circumvent learning the elements, or say not learning them at all, and him learning from the other people around him, which was Katara in the first season, presumably Toph in the second season, and the third season, she's just gonna. I'm not sure. He's just gonna. I'm not sure. Like I don't even know what's gonna happen in the third season if they decide to go with this path. It's gonna be a downward spiral from the get go if they decide to do it like that. Because they're just gonna depend on plot armor to like have Aang fight Ozai with just the Avatar state and airbending. Which no, we're talking about the strongest present day firebender. Airbending in the Avatar state is not gonna cut it. And that's the beauty of the original. And mastering all four elements to fight the one person that is throwing the world off balance. And if they try to cut corners to like fit their narrative, then they're fucking it up big time. I can see why the directors decided to leave the project mid production because they know this view is fucked. And if they don't put their big boy pants up and take action to actually make the story what it should be, then people are going to hate this series. They're probably going to hate it even more than the 2010 movie because they can't use money as an excuse. Money is not a driving factor here because this is Netflix. This is the big boys we're talking about. They have all the money, all the CGI, all the budgets, all the resources they want and could get, especially with a series as popular as Avatar. They have no excuses. They just have to put their big boy pants on and make a good fucking series. Something that they cannot do if they go through with that flawed narrative. I'm hoping that that's not the case because Netflix already announced that they're making seasons 2 and 3 simultaneously to avoid the characters hitting puberty and just like not being a good acting experience, which to me is rather confusing, but okay. So what's to come? I hope they actually develop the characters, that Aang actually learns the elements, and overall, they just keep or try to recreate the original charm that the animated series had. Because if not, this series is gonna suck for the rest of its cycle. Both seasons are going to suck if they don't step up and rise to the occasion. So, yeah, they got to put on their big boy pants, or else an entire fandom is going to be pissed. And I don't exactly want the Avatar fandom to have the same flawed reputation that other great fandoms like the FNAF fandom have had over time, thanks to its entries just not being great. So, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this discussion because I don't think I've been more passionate for any other series at this point. I watched 7 seasons worth of Avatar content, and to me, that's a testament of how much I love the series. Overall, to me, as a series, Avatar is like the animated one, is one of my favorite series because as a kid, I was obsessed with that whole elements concept: fire, air, wind. I don't know if it was the fact that I grew up in the era where stickman animations and all those elements things started popping up on YouTube, but to me, this series was like a fever dream. I initially was drawn to it because they said the animation was good, which it is. It's monstrous. But yeah, this series is great. And the live action one has the potential to be that if Netflix puts on their big boy pants and actually gets the fucking work instead of fucking around with some empty narrative that is not going to do anyone any favors. And I think that not just me, but the creators know that all too well. So, Netflix, be careful. That's all I'm saying. So, yeah, that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and let's hope there's more to come. We'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.